Hi, I'm Nathen Harvey with DORA. Today we had a great community discussion with Mike Long, who talked to us about software delivery governance. Unfortunately, I forgot to hit the record button right at the beginning, but I did catch it shortly after Mike began presenting. Let's catch up with him now.
The promise of DevOps and these um, highly regulated industries. And yeah, I've been working in the space ever since. And for me, I think the mission is really exciting. This mission critical software is everywhere, right? It drives our cars, it calculates our bank balance, it discovers drug treatments. This stuff is really important. We want more of it. We want it to go faster. We want the promise that DevOps brings to even these very critical pieces of our infrastructure. So that's what I want to talk about today. Obviously, my presentation will be short and more of a discussion opener, a discussion starter. So I'm really excited to hear and learn from you all as well, and find out what you're interested in and what you've seen work and what challenges you've faced as well. So yeah, very much looking forward to that. So okay, what are we talking about? Software delivery governance. It's really about what does it mean to make software in industries where you have either regulations, audit requirements, needs to be met. But maybe just zooming out from that, let's just talk about software delivery for a start. And in general, if you took the Duplo model, the very simplistic view of software delivery, like this process of getting to production, you have to build your software in a regulated industry. It goes through some kind of release process, and then it hopefully runs and delivers some value to some end user of the software. Now, if you're in a regulated industry, there's probably all kinds of risks associated with the different steps and processes in this world around your build, your release, and your run. So you'll introduce controls in that space, controls to handle these various risks. And with those controls, you need to be able to prove that you're doing them. So this is what it means to be a governed system or working in a regulated industry. You have to have a process for managing the risks. You have to actually follow those processes, and DevOps is great for that because it helps you put these things on autopilot or in automation. And then you need to prove that you followed these processes, because at some point an auditor or a regulator is going to ask you to prove it, right? And it could be simple things like, hey, show me that your images get scanned for vulnerabilities. It might be before you release a new application, you have to show that all the code changes have been reviewed by someone other than the author, so that you're managing insider threat risks, sorry. Or it might be that you just need to keep records for what software is running in your environments over time. You have to make sure that you've got change approvals for every piece of software that's running. These are just some examples, but typically you'll have all kinds of controls that are producing all kinds of evidence across your software delivery lifecycle. And getting away from this pretty simplistic abstract view, what a software delivery process normally looks like is a bit more like spaghetti, right? You've got all these different tools and systems interacting to form your path to production. And ideally, you have a team managing this as a product. You've got a platform as a product and figuring out how to make the sausage factory work. So you'll have tools around requirements, build, testing, security scanning, test automation, deployment automation, infrastructure as code, all those things that we know and love around DevOps. And what often gets missed in this view is that there's people in this picture. And those people, those stakeholders have an interest. They have got questions of this system. And that's especially true if you're in a regulated environment. So you want to know, like the developers, they probably just want to know, how do I get to production? What do I need to fill out? Why? What magic incantation do I put in this text field in ServiceNow to get where I need to be? But also, there's operations and SRE teams that get alerts, and they need to be able to go through and find out exactly what changed, who changed it, and who to talk to about it. Often you have security. It's a really important risk vector that folks are concerned about. And the folks in security, they kind of make policies, they buy tools, but they need to know, are those tools being used? Are these security policies being followed? As a change management function, you need to be able to explain to your business and to your users how the systems are changing over time for them. In a regulated industry, you'll have people whose job it is to maintain the compliance and governance of this process. So we often call them control owners, and they'll want to know, hey, are we following our process? And then finally, there's the audit function where they'll say, okay, you say you've got a process, you say you follow the process. I need the receipts, show me the proof that you followed that. And then you have to scramble in this spaghetti to show the evidence that they're interested in. And, it's not that simple, because in an organization, you don't have one piece of software or one change. You have, typically tens of thousands of applications in a large financial services organization. And you're having to look across all of time to show that you've stayed in this state of compliance. So it looks a bit more like this at scale, or even worse, really. Like, the observability problem is real. How do you govern a system that is really hard to observe? And the answer typically is through a really slow and risky feedback cycle. So you'll have a feedback cycle that has governance folks, security, change management, audit, and so on, setting requirements and policies. Engineers interpreting them and figuring out how to operationalize that and the tools and practices, ways of working that they have. And then maybe once a year, you will close this loop with an audit. It's retrospective, it's point in time. It's usually a sample of your whole landscape and a sample of the changes in that landscape. And you'll be asked to provide evidence in the form of spreadsheets and screenshots to show that you've followed your processes. So what that means for an engineer is that to get to production, you have to do a bunch of manual stuff. You have to capture all that evidence so that later you can show it to someone. And Gus Paul over at Morgan Stanley gave this talk at the DevOps Enterprise Summit a few years ago, where they were talking about life before they automated this change process. And they said they basically did a value stream map of what it took to get a line of code change into production. And it required 3 JIRAs, a change ticket, and 81 individual manual steps to get there. Now imagine multiplying that across 20,000 engineers, you get an indication of the scale and friction. Like, just imagine what this does to your DORA metrics. What it means is that every single change becomes slower, right? You get friction in the process, so you release less often, you make bigger releases, which are more risky, and we all know what that means. Because it's all manual as well, doing the audit is often quite a manual process. You have to go around to different tools and different systems to try and get the evidence that the auditor's looking for. And because you've done it manually, you'll find gaps. Like, people will reuse evidence. There'll be new systems that don't have the evidence required. There'll be out-of-date evidence. And this just becomes a problem because you get findings, and then you end up having more controls in your system, so you have to make more evidence for next year. So you kind of get in this sticky feedback loop. What an automated software delivery governance process looks like is that, like, you kind of imagine all the controls you need, the evidence you need to gather, the proof that you're following that process, and you apply the DevOps principles around, automation and bringing the culture, bringing the stakeholders together to agree what this new way of working should look like. So you get to a world where the interface for engineers is just their simple git push. You let the platform take care of itself. And because each change documents itself through the platform, then you're always ready for an audit. And what that means is that when the auditors come, they don't find any compliance gaps. So you've got more focus on engineering. So that's kind of the rough idea around software delivery governance. Can we take these manual broken processes and build it in a DevOps kind of way? So just before we head over to the lean coffee, I just wanted to give a few different concepts that might be useful when discussing some of this stuff. So you might think, okay, well, you've got all these controls in your landscape. You have to figure out how to automate. What does that actually mean? Like concretely, how do we do this? So kind of just to set this, the baseline here, what we mean when we talk about control in the space of SDLC is a check or a restraint on an activity. Like it could be like you must have done a code review, for example. That's a check. You're going to check that, and that control must be mapped to a risk. So as an example, you mandate code review to mitigate an insider threat that someone inside your organization writes code that skims pennies off the interest calculation and puts it into their account, for example. Code review is a good mitigation against that threat. So a control can map to multiple risks, and risks can map to a control, many controls, or none controls. It could be just an unmitigated risk, so that happens too. So just that's what a control is. And visually, I'm just looking at this and realizing it's not very friendly for folks that have color blindness, but what that means is you're kind of setting the bounds for what acceptable looks like on a value or an event, an activity. And then you're doing an evaluation to say whether something falls within those boundaries or out with those boundaries. It's not very complicated, right? And another way to think about it is from the terminology used in access control from the IETF or NIST's definitions of control, where they talk about this concept of a policy enforcement point. And a policy enforcement point is just a fancy word to say like the diamond in a triangle. It's got a yes or no binary outcome. Either you proceed or you don't. And it's based on some input. Here's my vulnerability scan from our scanning tool. Can I proceed or not? Is it good enough? And if not, you don't proceed. And if it is, you do proceed. That's a control. And that decides whether you're within or without the bounds. Sometimes you would ask an external system whether to proceed or not. So you might say, to get to production, I must have an approval in a given system. So you go off and check that system. Do I have an approval for this change? If yes, then we continue. So that's called a policy decision point. And then finally, there's a system of record. Like every time you perform a control, you have to record that, because that's how you meet the audit requirements. You have to show that this control has been performed over and over again over time, and you have to have the evidence for that. So that's kind of just some rough terminology that might be useful for folks. And then finally, just what that means is, like the reason we're going from this manual controls to automated controls is we want to go from a world where we have to place a lot of trust in humans. We have to check and trust humans, to like this world where there's zero trust in humans, and we're focused on verifiable fact-based data. So for instance, like if you want to know if something's been tested, you could ask QA to sign off on something, or you could have an automated test result. And the same thing for requirements. Do you have to check that manually, or is it code automatically tied to requirements? Or penetration testing, like that's slow and human driven, but you can use automated tools on a continuous basis to do this. And so on. Like, so what you start to think about is, can we make the controls we have higher efficacy and lower cost, so we can do them more often automated without people? So yeah, I understand I've just covered a bunch of things, but hopefully that'll be a good conversation starter. I'll hand it back to you, Nathen, and then we'll see where it goes.